This is from Maine with Love, an Allagash Brewing podcast where we talk about beer, our community here in Maine, and things that generally make us happy. And today, we're talking homebrewing. With Corey McNutt, R&D brewer here at Allagash. Welcome, Corey. Katie Beaucage, brewer here at Allagash, and Patrick Chavanelle, senior R&D brewer. And I'm Brett. I work on the marketing team. Welcome. Thank you all for making the time to talk about homebrewing.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Happy to be
Very
here.
welcome. But before we get into homebrewing, we're going to do a quick secret question for everybody.
Oh, God.
Yep, going around the horn. Corey, what is the origin of the mullet and pickup truck video that you did for the company meeting?
The origin of it?
Yeah, how did that come about?
I just,
It's okay if you just decided you had to do it.
well, I was growing my hair out for a couple of years, and I was getting hot one day, and I'm like, this is enough. And a couple people here before had cut one, and people were like, oh, cut a mullet, then do a rat tail and all this. And I'm like, you know what? I'll do a mullet.
Yeah.
So I went down the road where I was living, and this lady actually cut it at a hair place. And she was like, are you sure you want to cut a mullet? And I'm like, oh, I'm sure. And so it was fun just kind of playing around with it. And, I was a little inspired by Joe Dirt. I'm not going to lie.
Sure.
And my lady helped me kind of record a little video.
Yeah.
So
just for context too, the video in question is it was at a company meeting. It's like Allagash legend at this point. And Corey put together a video of him with his mullet peeling out in a pickup truck in a very safe way.
very safe. Yeah.
And it was great. That was good. All right, Katie, are you a motorcyclist now? Is that what I hear?
Yeah, I am.
That's awesome.
I got my motorcycle license a couple weeks ago. Actually bought a motorcycle last fall. Wow. Yeah, I did that first. And then I was like, I should probably get my license, start riding this. It's just a little 250 Suzuki.
Nice.
It's a nice little ride.
I almost asked you about your license plate on your car because it's also pretty excellent.
Beer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beer.
BIER. So German beer.
It's good.
I couldn't believe it was available.
I kind of couldn't either. When I saw it pull into the brewery, I was like, that's kind of incredible.
Yeah.
That you were able to find that.
I'll be doing a vanity plate on the motorcycle too.
Oh, nice.
So that'll be a little surprise for you guys.
We'll have to have you back on then. That's great. All right, Patrick. My question for you is, should I buy or sell Bitcoin?
Oh, God. It was really a Bitcoin question.
Or should I just hold it?
You should just hold it.
Okay,
I don't
cool.
want to go on a whole rant about the reasons why.
Go off.
Yeah, I just won't even go there.
Okay.
But yeah, you should buy it and hold it and, hang on to it for
Just
a while.
hang on to it.
Yeah.
Let it be.
Exactly. For sure.
All right, good. That was a good response. That was what I was hoping for. I was hoping for some sort of response.
I mean, if you want this podcast to be about Federal Reserve and monetary policy, sure, we could do that too. But I feel like it'd probably put a bunch of people to sleep.
yeah, it's a side podcast.
Yeah.
That's good. That can be a special episode. Awesome. All right, so to the question at hand. So we posed a question to a lot of the people, or to the people who follow us on social media, just any homebrewing questions at all that they had. And people had a fair number of questions. It was pretty cool to see. And so what we're going to do is go through the questions kind of from a level of novice to intermediate to expert. So kind of no matter your homebrewing experience level, we hopefully will provide some insight for you. And I think I'm going to guess with the brewing knowledge that's available right here, there's going to be a lot of insight. So the first question comes from a person named R_Gross, who says, where do we start? It seems intimidating. Do you have to be strong in math and science? What's the best piece of advice for people interested in learning how to homebrew?
I would almost say it'd be similar to what Katie said about getting a motorcycle, where you just got to start by buying some ingredients and maybe a beginner's book to sort of force yourself into doing it. Otherwise, you're just going to be stuck in that like, oh, this is way too intimidating sort of phase, and you're not just going to rip off the Band-Aid and do it. I think it could be looked at as technical as you possibly can or as easy as you possibly can, in that all you have to do is take some grains, crush them up, let them sit in water for a little while, remove the liquid from it, boil it, add some hops, cool it down, add some, like, the steps are so basic, and you could overcomplicate it as much as you want. And that's like, once you really get into the weeds, that's one of the really fun aspects of it, because you're not only looking at it from like a scientific level, but also from, you know, like a recipe level where you get like the mix of art and science. But yeah, there are so many good beginner books out there that don't speak in terms of the processes from like a super technical level. They say just like, these are the basics. This is all you need to follow. You can get like super complicated eventually if you want to, which that's what happened to me personally. It's like starting from that first batch of homebrew, it like started to consume every aspect of my life up until this day still. Like, I go to bed and I read things about brewing and fermentation. Like, I wake up, I come to work, I do it all day, and like, that's where my mind is, because I'm unusual, I think, more or less, and slightly obsessive.
I think you and I have some things in common, but yeah.
But you know, it's you can overcomplicate it all you want, or it can be super simple. So yeah, getting a book and like kind of sort of forcing yourself to do it, I think is the best place to start.
So yeah, so for any of you, this is from another question from Craig Friedland. Have you done the malt extract versus the grain brewing in your time, or did you all do just some grain?
When I first started, you know, I did partial grain batches, so you'd get a small, you know, muslin bag of specialty grains, and then the rest would be, you know, liquid malt extract. So you basically start out kind of steep in specialty grains, and then, you know, rinse the grains off, and then I would add some more water and liquid malt extract and keep it pretty simple. And you know, those were just going into carboys at that time. You know, 6.5 gallon carboy primary and 5 gallon secondary, and just kept it really simple.
Totally. Can you explain what a carboy is for those?
It's just a glass, most of the time glass vessel. It looks like a big jug, kind of. And usually, you know, my primary, like I said, would be a 6.5 gallon that I had, and then my secondary would be a 5 gallon.
Patrick, what you were saying too about the getting started thing, I feel like, Katie, your kind of brewing journey is a bit like that. Like, I feel like you started like from a place of curiosity. And so is that what you found to be similar?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely started from this point of curiosity. Previously, I was a flight attendant, and so I was traveling a lot. And a common factor in most big cities that you go to is that there's different craft breweries. And that kind of piqued my interest initially. And I started working at a small brewery, just doing front of house stuff, and was just like, what is going on back there?
Right.
Very curious. And I just kind of pushed my way into the back. I was like, yeah, I'll catch cans off the end of the canning line.
Sure.
But can you show me how to clean that tank too? And, well, what are you doing over here? Are you writing a recipe? What's going in that? For me, a lot of my brewing experience started just working in a brewery.
Right.
I actually did more home brewing after I started working in a brewery. So, you know, a lot of our cellar people, the first brewery I worked at, we weren't getting on the brew house. So we would just brew batches in each other's garages.
That's very fun.
Yeah.
That's very fun.
You know, YouTube's a pretty amazing source of information right now. I mean, you can definitely go down crazy rabbit holes there.
Sure.
But I'm sure that there are very basic beginner videos. I haven't searched for them personally, but I'm sure they exist, and they could break things down into really simple terms.
Yeah, that actually was kind of like a later question that I'd sort of come across. It's just like, do you have any sort of go-to like homebrewing resources that you found to be particularly helpful along your journey? Was there like an early book or an early something?
Oh, mine was, I think it was John Palmer's How to Brew.
Okay.
I think somebody had gifted me that. It was like a Christmas gift or something, when they learned I started homebrewing. Mm-hmm. And that was a pretty good book.
Cool.
Recipes, it goes through all the process. It's got some recipes in it. It's pretty good.
Nice.
I got some ones. Like I said, I'm an obsessive person to some extent. So I had that book. I had Ray Daniels Designing Great Beers. I had what the hell's his name? You're gonna probably edit this out later.
Okay.
What's the dude?
We never edited
the Joy
anything
of
out.
Homebrewing.
Oh, Charlie.
Charlie Papazian.
I had Charlie Papazian's
Nice.
The Joy of Homebrewing. Actually, when I first got hired here, within, 9 to 12 months of me working here, he came to visit the brewery to do some sort of like special event. And to me, he was just like, oh my God, this guy like changed my life.
Yeah.
So I went up to him, this crazy person. I was just like, oh my God, I'm so excited to meet you. And I like shook his hand and he was like, thanks, nice to meet you. Like he was very kind.
Yeah.
But like I was a little too intense in my like way in which I said hi.
Do you like jump out of a barrel or something? You're like,
I can't believe it's you.
but yeah, my dad.
And the other big thing for me, and they're still around, the Brewing Network had a podcast. You listen to that too, right, Corey?
Oh, yeah.
They had a podcast all about just brewing, and the ones that they recorded, 10 plus years ago are still around.
Right.
And they talked about the basics and they talk about brewing specific styles. And that was also an obsession because it was actually before recorded podcasts. Now I'm sounding really old. I swear I'm not that old. It was before recorded podcasts. Like they had this like live stream. So you'd have to at like 8:00 at nights on whatever Friday or Saturday, because I had no life and I was just doing beer stuff. You'd have to tune in live in order to like hear the interviews and stuff. So yeah, that was just like the tip of the iceberg of the books that I had and other resources.
And the other part that this came up in, so I'll give a little backstory. Before this podcast, I actually went around the brewery and just asked people questions because there are actually a ton of homebrewers at this brewery, as I'm sure there are at every brewery. But I think it's similar to what you just said too, Katie, of like the fact that get a friend or a mentor or people to help you. Because I feel like one of the sort of unspoken things about homebrewing is like it takes a long time. It's like someone said like 6 hours about for like a single brew. Is that kind of a brew day?
Yeah, between 5 and 6 hours for one batch.
Right.
Depending on how long your boil is.
So I feel like for my experience, because I have not done a ton of home brewing, but I feel like I've done an equivalent thing in that I got obsessed with bread for a little while, like everyone else did during the pandemic. But I feel like bread is one of those things where you do something for a little while and then wait for a long time, and then do something for a little while and wait for a long time. And I think that's kind of similar. Is that a similar way to how the brew day goes?
Yeah. And plus, they both have yeast.
Oh, they both exactly, and some grains.
I guess, here it can be a little different with our 70 barrel brew house.
Right.
Because once that thing is on, it's going to be on until Friday, usually. But, if you're doing a single batch, like on our 30 barrel brew house, it could definitely be a lot of like start and stop. You get your mash in and you might have an hour rest.
Right.
So you might do some hops and then hang around a little bit. And especially once you're in the kettle and you're boiling, that's like the chill time right there.
There you go.
I don't know. I feel like I was high anxiety whenever I was brewing. I was like, it was a little stress. It was enjoyable, but it was like stressful.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, back then you'd spend a lot of money on ingredients, and like I wouldn't be the person that would drink and brew at the same time because I didn't want to screw it up. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but like I'd spend $70 on the ingredients to make 5 gallons of beer or whatever it cost.
Right.
So I don't know. I didn't have a whole lot of like downtime mentally.
You're just reading books.
I was just like, oh my God, I just want to make sure I'm doing everything right. But there's like some cleaning to do along the way too. So like you fill up your time more or less, I think.
That was another one that came up is like clean the stuff immediately after you've used it. Because if you leave it, it tends to stay left for too long. Is that the experience you've had?
Yeah, it gets super gnarly too.
Yeah.
If you leave it.
Yeah.
We'd always be, my buddy and I would brew a lot together, and we'd always like have a couple of beers and be like, oh shit, we left this dirty from last time. We got to clean it before we knock out. You know, we're boiling. We're like, oh God damn it, we got to get this clean.
I'm sure it's a common experience for people.
Yeah.
All right. Intermediate questions. We're moving up a little bit in the level of difficulty. So Mark Loisel says, love Allagash. You guys are great. Thank you. What is the best way to monitor necessary fermentation temp? Heard many methods, but more seem difficult than others. And also, I'm going to follow this up with best low-cost fermentation temp control from another person named Michael Edwardson. So all about fermentation. How the heck do you do it?
It's tough on the homebrew scale. I mean, we've kind of, my buddy and I started, I mean, really, when I first started brewing, like I said, I was using carboys, and I would just have, you know, one of those sticker temperature things on the side, and I'd wrap it in like jackets to try and help it. Like, but I remember one year I was brewing in this employee housing, and I probably wasn't supposed to be brewing there, but there was nothing that said I shouldn't be. And I remember it was like a wicked hot summer, and I was doing this fermentation, and the blow off clogged, and it blew off. And like shot up, hit the ceiling. Like there was just like trube everywhere, and I was like, oh. But so from the get-go, like the early on stuff was very, you know, just one of those temperature stickers on the side. And then as things progressed, we made like a fermentation box, you know, out of wood and insulation, and that was still pretty janky. You know, I would say the best way for a home brewer, if you can't get like if you can't spend the money on like an SS BrewTech system or something, you know, would be like an old fridge, if you can find one, and use a Ranco controller, you know, which Ranco you can get decently cheap, and, you know, you can just keep it in there and kind of, you can have the temperature off. The one thing is, I mean, it works well enough. I think that's like one of the best options. If, you know. So Ranco controller for sure.
I had one of those too.
Yeah.
I did it a little differently. We had a basement in all the places that we stayed in. So the basement floor always stayed pretty cold. Mm-hmm. So all I would do is I did buckets. I wasn't as fancy as you, Corey. We're the nice car boys. Yeah. So I just had a plastic bucket, and I would put the Ranco controller on one side. So, you know, have the probe on one side, and then it'd have a heat wrap on the other side.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
So the basement was cold enough to keep it cold, and then to supplement the heat, I would have that jacket kind of go on and off connected to the controller. And it was pretty cheap. Like that temp wrap, that like heat wrap, I don't know, it was $10.
Wow.
That Ranco controller, $40 maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
So, I don't know,
$50.
$50, $60. You can have like a pretty decent temp control as long as you can find a cool place to put it in.
Right.
And then I guess the other thing I'd say is if you don't have that luxury, just kind of choosing the style that you brew based on the temperature that it is. So brewing seasonally, more or less. So if it's really hot, it's not to say that all Belgian beers need to be fermented hot, because I feel like that's like a misnomer. Like that's not exactly correct.
Sure.
Like hotter is not always better. But they can take that like heat more or less and can be beneficial. And then maybe when it's colder, you brew more colder fermenting beers. So I guess that would be the other cheaper option.
Totally.
Yeah, I think, you know, like Chavez is saying, if it's almost more beneficial to have a cold area to store your carboy or whatever it is that you're fermenting. And it's a bit more cost effective to have like a heating unit.
Yeah.
So I know in the past, I know people who have used like seedling mats.
Yeah.
Those are very responsive.
Yeah.
You know, like even like an Inkbird temp probe, those ones are pretty affordable too. And you can just plug in a seedling mat to that, kind of get your temp probe against your carboy or your fermentation vessel. Because if you already have access to the cold, like a nice basement, just get a little bit of heat on there. Those
That's
are
good.
pretty effective too.
Nice.
You know, like, it's so weird I've grown up in New England my whole life.
Yeah.
Not everyone has basements, turns out. Like, down in
What?
Texas, they were like, what's a basement?
They all have a swimming pool.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
So put it in the swimming pool.
Yeah.
Not all the way.
Just get a bathysphere. Yeah. So this actually kind of brings up the other question that was I feel like a good specific one of like, you know, I know you're talking brew seasonally, Patrick, of like, you know, if you're familiar with beer styles, you can kind of figure out, oh, you know, this goes with this sort of season. But I think that like maybe for the person who's even not familiar with beer styles, what would be the like primary styles of beer to start with? As like, this is kind of going back to the novice, but like what styles do you feel like are the most forgiving potentially of errors in the beginning?
Chocolate cherry stout, because that was the first beer I ever brewed. No, honestly, anything dark.
Yeah.
I mean, we've learned, you know, being involved in the pilot team here, anything dark is just more forgiving. It
Right.
can mask other, like, both good characters and like your off flavors way more than like what would be the polar opposite, which would be like a light lager. Which, you know, there's nowhere for anything to hide in a beer like that. So
Right.
a stout, a porter, I don't know, something dark.
I started off with pale ales and
Yeah.
Ooh,
be
Corey.
like crystal malt and everything, you know what I mean? Like back then, crystal malt and Cascade, you know, kind of ruled the world back then, in my world anyway.
Yeah.
So I started off with a lot of different pale ales and kind of messed around with the hops and stuff. So
That was actually the other one that I heard when I asked was pale ales and IPAs. Just I think the common denominator. I don't know if you're thinking this too, Katie, but like the common denominator being like any beer that has one prominent note to it seems to be the way to go. Whereas when the notes need to work in harmony, it kind of gets harder and harder.
Yeah, especially, you know, if you maybe don't have as much experience
Right.
with the ingredients that you're working with. If you're trying to build a really complex flavor profile, it just leaves a lot of room for error and off flavors. I mean, I think some of the most forgiving styles when you're starting are like brown ales and maltier English styles too
Sure.
are very forgiving.
It was crazy. The other day, when was it? Last week, Katie and I had this sensory meeting where we're tasting through a bunch of different spiked samples of Hop Reach, our IPA. And there was one that was spiked with diacetyl, which is that like buttery character. And as soon as I smelled that, it was something I haven't thought about in so long, but the second beer I ever brewed was this clone of Pliny the Elder from Russian River.
Yeah.
And I smelled that beer with diacetyl, and it like brought me back to that second batch of homebrew I've ever done. I was like, oh my God, that batch was awful. And like I just realized it then from 15 years ago that like that was the issue. My beer smelled like butter. It was a very weird reaction.
That, you know, what's really funny about that was actually one of the most surprising, like, sort of pieces of information that I got from asking people around. Is I asked Matthew Davis, who's one of our quality control folks, and he said, you should, if your beer tastes bad, don't dump it. Don't dump most of it. Just keep it, because then you could potentially either taste it yourself and get some sort of a feel for like what's wrong with it, or bring it to a friend who is good at home brewing or a good brewer, and they might be able to tell you where you went wrong based on what that off flavor is, because there are a lot of clues in off flavors. Like, what would you do about diacetyl? I mean, what do you do about diacetyl?
You dump it all.
Well, I don't say don't give your bad beer to friends to drink for fun. Just give it to them for education.
It's kind of, you don't know for sure. It
Right.
could come from like microbes.
Sure.
Due to infection. So in that case, you couldn't do anything about it. Or just pour fermentation, or, you know, you could probably hold on to it for a little while longer, and maybe it would clean up. Maybe. I don't know. I guess it would. It's a case by case basis kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, diacetyl's tricky too. You know, it's one of those things that could be from dirty tap lines, or you didn't give your yeast long enough to consume the diacetyl in the beer.
Right.
It's good to keep notes. That's something that I don't know if a lot of homebrewers think about as much, is like detailed note taking will kind of help you to, find the clues of where something might have gone wrong.
Totally.
Like, oh, wow, maybe I should have, let this ferment out another couple days. Or, there was one day where, like, I don't know, that we lost power in the house and everything got really hot because it was the middle of summer. Things like that, note taking. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah. That's good. This next question is funny to me because I think there is no answer for this person, unfortunately. It says, Dave Bemis, I was an avid homebrewer, but recently decided to put it on hold because I don't have enough time. I have 3 kids under the age of 3.
Oh, God.
Dave. Oh, God. Did any Allagash employee homebrew with young kids? If so, how did they find time to do it? I think you got a life problem, Dave.
I don't think anyone has ever homebrewed that has, like, children under 3.
Yeah.
Like, in the existence of humanity. There's no time.
Sorry, Dave.
That's crazy. It's crazy.
Sorry.
3 kids? That's insane.
Yeah.
Under 3? Wow.
I know.
That's a lot.
I have 2 kids who are fairly young, and, like, doing anything is hard. But yeah.
Sounds like Dave's going to have to wait a couple of years.
You just got to wait it out.
Wait it out.
I think any option Dave has, his significant other would be very upset with him.
6 hours. Yeah, of childcare. Yeah. I don't know. We might not even keep that in there. Sorry, Dave, but we may do it. Let's see. All right. Now we're going up. We're going up to the more expert level. IB Bearded Brewer says, how do y'all go about scaling up an idea from a homebrew idea into a full-scale production recipe? He says, thank you and love y'all beers podcast, which is very nice. Thank you for liking the podcast. But yeah, how do we go about scaling recipes up?
We just take everything and multiply it by 100, and that's it. It's so simple. Yeah, I don't know. We've been doing it for so long now that we have a pretty good method, and our method probably is different than the brewery next door to us, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. There are some ingredients that you can just sort of scale more or less by like some sort of multiplier. But there are some other things, such as a big one for us is just being able to scale the exact bitterness that we want in the beer is a little challenging. Whereas it doesn't necessarily scale from pilot to 30 barrel or 70 barrel batch.
Interesting.
We have an internal, how do you want to call it? Unit called the Allagash Alpha unit that we utilize. It's a made up number that we utilize to adjust the amount of hops we're adding based on alpha acids. This is not going to be a very helpful answer at all. As I'm saying this,
it shows the thought.
So it's I guess there isn't like the best. We don't have the. What am I trying to say? It's a complicated question.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, right.
And each beer is a little different.
Sure.
But there are some additions that are scaled from pilot to anything bigger proportionally.
Yeah.
Like a Whirlpool edition, whether it's a hop or some other unusual ingredient, we'll scale that on like a pound per barrel basis. Mm-hmm. If it's a dry hop, we'll do the same. But everything kind of before that is sort of like a case-by-case basis. And I think that's all I'm going to say, because I think that's all I have to say. But I feel like I didn't do a great job answering that question.
No, I've thoughts. Either of you have any thoughts on that?
Couldn't put it any better myself.
I think the long and the short of that for me is like, in everything that I've learned about beer is like, it is like such a fiddlier process than like I ever expected it to be, where it was like we changed the angle at which this certain thing, like this certain spout was pouring onto the beer, and it like changed the product massively after like a month in like like there just are such tiny nuances to changing stuff that have large and like potentially bad impacts on down the line.
There are, but I feel like we have a pretty good way in which we control variables in the process from a pilot perspective, and obviously beyond that. So like temperature control in the mash is controlled fairly well in the pilot scale, and even better scaling up. So like that's not really a big variable there.
Sure.
Really, like you're just making some sugar water going into the boil. So I don't think there's a ton of variability. I think we do a pretty great job of scaling beers up to the point where they more or less match from like a scaled version versus a pilot. And I guess the other thing I'll add is, sorry, I feel like I'm talking too long, is that we actually do have like a follow-up meeting regularly for any beer we scale up. We'll sit down with that beer, taste it as a small group, and ensure that we sort of matched what we did on a pilot versus what we scaled. And if we didn't, we're tasting the beer when it's fresh. We'll make notes so that if we intend on making that beer again in the future or scaling it up even more, we'll be able to reference like what things we needed to adjust to dial it in even more so after that. So.
Nice.
So yeah, there are many steps along the way.
Okay.
I guess.
That's good.
And I'll stop talking now. Sorry.
It's all right. We got another one. So, all right, we're nearing the end of our questions. And if we didn't get to your question, I apologize, but we probably will have another one of these podcasts, honestly, to do another homebrew follow-up if we get more questions. So
weekly follow-up.
Sounds great. Turn it into a homebrew podcast. All right, Little Orange Hellcat _brewing. So I might be talking to a real deal brewer here.
Whoa.
What's the best way and time to add fresh fruit so it retains as much of its flavor as possible in the final product? Specifically strawberries. Freeze them first, cook them a little. I know you shouldn't dump a quart of fresh strawberries. Or we don't want to give away any trade secrets here, but I think the question is two parts. Part one is kind of like, how do you add fruit to beer? What's our philosophy there? But part two is kind of like, how do you do that at home? Like, do you buy some Wyman's like frozen berries or something, or what do you do?
I never really added any fruit to my home brews. I'd say for the most part, you got to decide whether you want the beer to be wild or tame. Right? Would be the first thing, because if you throw fruit into your fermenter, it's going to be wild, most likely. I've never really used frozen fruit that much. Always used fresh fruit. Here, we kind of do it towards the end of fermentation.
I mean, I think that what you're saying about, especially if you want it to be wild, I think something you might not think about is if you're adding fresh fruit like from the grocery store into your fermenter, that fruit has yeast on it.
Yeah.
And, if you're doing some completely different style, adding any sort of wild character to that can really ruin your beer. There are places you can find aseptic purees.
Sure.
Even some local farms. I mean, kind of part of that is having that fruit be pasteurized. So if you can find a local grower that has the ability to do that, that would be a good move. But it's tricky. If you add anything on the hop side, you're not really going to get much character. And strawberries are already you're not really going to get much character from strawberries compared to other fruits as it is.
Right. Strawberries, I feel like, are notoriously difficult to get the flavor of strawberry out of.
Yeah, if you want fresh strawberry character, even the wild beers that we add fresh strawberries to, like I agree, if you want fresh fruit character, adding it as late as possible into like a beer's life is probably the best thing to do. But to your guys' point, like the beer is going to then be wild unless you're cooking it to some extent, which will then change the profile of that fruit and maybe not come off as like a fresh berry character anymore.
Yeah.
So the beers that we've done on the wild side with strawberries, they come off more sort of jammy than anything else. And I mean, that could be pleasant, but if you're looking for fresh strawberry, if you're looking for fresh strawberry character, it might be better to go something more artificial, whether it's a puree or something else. Like if you really want like that fresh strawberry note,
Right.
like you can add some fruit to the beer if you pasteurize it, but then like utilizing, one thing, sorry, going down a rabbit hole now. One thing that we haven't done much of, which I think would be cool to do more of, is to sort of layer in flavor by taking different types of that fruit. So whether you're taking like dried strawberries along with some like pasteurized fresh strawberries, and then maybe some strawberry essence or something like that. So you don't have to try to get all the character that you're looking for out of one thing. You can use different strawberry types or like different forms of strawberry in different ratios to get at like ultimately that like final strawberry character you're trying to achieve. So we haven't done that a whole lot, although we have played around a little bit with some dried fruit, and I think we'll probably continue that. So it's like some dried in addition to some fresh could be cool.
That's interesting.
Because like each gives off a different character because like ultimately they're like processed differently. We've used freeze-dried fruit. We just brewed from Ain't Love with some freeze-dried rhubarb. So using some like freeze-dried strawberry and some like fresh strawberry and strawberry puree, doing some like small dilutions with those and seeing what you like and then coming up with the blend. That could be cool. Nice. But again, we've never done it, so I don't know.
Totally.
We've done some dried fruit on the cold side, right?
Yeah.
And then freeze dried in the hot side before.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So this one is kind of a follow-up because talking about wild beer brewed with something that's not Saccharomyces, the normal like sort of brewer's yeast. It's brewed with something like Brettanomyces or wild yeast that you find in the air. So a person is talking about, I'm going to paraphrase their question. It's from Worst Alarm Clock Ever. It's a good question. Making lambic at home. Is that possible? Or lambic style beer at home, I should say. Unless you live in the lambic region of Belgium, you're not going to be making lambic anywhere but there.
I think you can come pretty close, but it's not going to be the same thing.
Sure.
You can throw all the bugs at it, but it's still not going to be the same as if you're knocking out into a cool ship in the fresh air. I mean, that's just my thought. But
You could build yourself a mini cool ship room.
yeah,
That's what I was wondering.
You could.
Yeah.
I mean, you could
Use
just
an actual
scale
brownie
everything.
pan. Just do a little brownie pan sized.
Corey,
I mean, yeah.
I thought you guys did build the mini cool ship.
We did build a mini cool ship,
Okay.
but we never actually ended up
mention that.
knocking out into it. Life
okay.
got kind of busy, but we had this big kind of stainless steel drip pan and then we built a little wooden room around it. I mean, it was pretty small. It was like
That's awesome.
it was like, I don't know, 4 by or maybe 2 by 6 or something like that.
Yeah.
2 feet wide, 6 feet long. And we had some little mini windows on the side that would flip open.
Really?
It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. But we never ended up actually knocking out into it, unfortunately.
After all that effort.
Do you
I
still
know.
have it?
Evan, my buddy took it.
Oh,
my
no.
buddy
Did-
still has
Did
it.
you have like a little stained glass window on the
We
front?
actually had somebody who works here is into stained glass, and she made us some small little windows for it.
Oh, no
It was
way.
pretty slick. It was pretty cool looking.
That's amazing.
That's so cool.
Wow. I was not expecting that. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So
all
you
you
could
have
do
to
that.
do is do that.
Make a mini cool ship, and you
Just
should
do
be
that. Then you need tiny barrels. And you could tiny barrel room. Oh man. Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't be more helpful on that one. That's just like I feel like that's a whole other process.
I think you can get somewhat close by cheating.
Sure.
By like making wort. It's actually, I think they might sell aged hop pellets maybe for home brewers. Maybe, I don't know if they supply them in like those small quantities, but you could easily
them.
age your own pellets.
Right.
Just keep them warm. So that covers sort of like the boil and that aspect of it. And then just pitching, I think what Corey was getting to, like some like the either that, or you can like take some dregs of some lambics that you like and dump that into your beer. Do that a couple times.
This person mentioned B. lambicus. Is that a yeast strain that you're familiar with?
That's Brettanomyces lambicus.
Oh, okay.
And honestly, that's just one. Like if you're actually looking at all of the microorganisms that are in wild fermented or spontaneously fermented beer, that is just one of 50 plus. Wow. So and those go through cycles of fermentation where certain microbes are busy doing things, and then they die off, and then like comes the next round of like the Brettanomyces fermentation, and those kind of pitter away. And so just using that to try to replicate like a lambic quotations style beer, I don't think that's going to get you there. But doing like either a blend of bacteria, Lactobacillus, Pediococcus, couple Brett strains, or I honestly think your better option is to just take some buy some cool shipper sorghum because that beer is awesome.
There you go.
And that has all the stuff that you need. So, drink half of that and then swirl it up and dump the rest into your carboy, and maybe do that twice. And then you'll get all of the microbes. Like that beer's not filtered by any means, and it has a blend of different years, and although the beers in there cumulatively are on the older side, those bugs in there are pretty resilient, and they'll start chipping away at sugary water and food if they've got it. So do that.
There you go. All right, I got one last one. And this is for all the people who have listened to this and been like, there is no way I'm going to go brew beer now. This sounds too hard for me. What do you guys think about cider? You make your own cider? Is that an easy way to go? Or just buy your beer?
Do both. There you go. Oh, man. I'm obsessed with ciders. You just piqued my interest as soon as you said the C word.
Yeah. Is it? I guess, is it simpler? Couldn't it be made simpler? I'm guessing.
I think it. I've made cider before. I used to be a home brewer too. I think it's easier to make a cider, a very rough, simple cider.
Right.
You know what I mean? Nothing too fancy, but literally we would just grind up the apples, press them, throw them in a carboy. Sometimes I didn't even pitch yeast. It was just whatever was on the skins of the fruit.
Sure.
Put an airlock on it and wait, that would get you a cider. I mean, it's not, super artisanal or anything, but it'll get you some cider, and it's a lot faster. The process of making it is faster. The fermentation sometimes would be longer, though.
Sure.
It's a different experience too. You're out. Sometimes you're out in the my friend had an orchard, and his dad had an old press, and so you're out kind of outside. You're grinding the apples, you're pressing it. It's a cool experience.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot less. I don't want to say a lot less science-based, but a lot less process-based.
Sure.
Which, all of the brewing processes involve science to some extent. With brewing beer, it is, if you really want to get into the weeds, it's very technical, and there's a lot of, how do I want to say it? It's complicated.
Yeah.
It's incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
Making essentially wine with fruit, or just cider with apples, that's pretty simple. Mm-hmm. You crush up apples, you get the juice out. You might pitch yeast, you might not. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all of these other biochemical things that are occurring over time, but that's it. And you probably shouldn't touch it. You probably should leave it alone for a while and not not even look at it. Which was some lambic brewers in Belgium, when they talk about like brewing lambic, it's like they don't move their barrels at all. It's don't even look at them.
Yeah.
Because I think they're, because it could influence the final product.
Sure.
Maybe.
So it's a less involved. You can make it a less involved process. You can give it a try, and you'll come up with something that is alcoholic, and you can drink it
for sure, and it won't harm you.
It'll just be apple juice with a little bit of something.
Alcohol.
Yeah, that's the something. That's true. That's the something. Awesome. All right. Anything anyone wants to add? Anything that you feel like you didn't get to touch on for our homebrewing friends?
I'm sorry I talk so much. I just get really excited to talk about this stuff.
That's why I want to have you on here, Patrick, because you're very passionate. It's good.
Okay.
I would say kind of, what Chavez was talking about early on, like just get into it if you want to. Don't focus on all the technical stuff in the beginning. Just like if you're not having fun, what's the point? Just get started off simple. Buy yourself a cheap, thin-walled pot. Throw it on the stove. Get a little bit of grains in there in a bag. Mix a little LME in there and some water, and just have fun.
I like that. That's a good message.
If you can cook a meal, you can brew a beer.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it.
It's amazing.
I think that's the best piece of advice there. And like going back to what you were saying on bread, I've made so many breads lately. I'm a little obsessed with bread making. So I go through phases of obsession.
Obsessive.
And a lot of them are just total garbage. Yeah. But it's like, oh yeah. And to your point of, saving your beer when it's messed up, you can learn from that. And I think your first batch probably isn't going to be great. The second batch, hopefully it's an improvement. And there could be some bumps in the road along the way, but a gradual improvement over time is, I think, where you'll be, and as long as you continue doing it over and over again, and it's awesome. I don't know. It's start, and then hopefully it won't become as much of an obsession as it did for me. But
we'll cross our fingers.
But I don't know what Corey and Katie said are probably the best things to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for everyone on social media who sent in your questions. This was super cool. So I learned a lot about homebrewing, and I might have to get out there and homebrew. I'm probably not going to, but I might. I could
because you have kids,
but I won't. Yeah, because I have kids, but I'm not going to, but I could. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been an Allagash Brewing production. And if you have something you want us to talk about on the show, shoot us a message at podcast@allagash.com.